We're the Anglo-Saxons Germanic. As you know, according to the conventional accounts, originally the British Isles were settled by people of a Celtic culture. They spoke a Celtic type language. They made artifacts, and they had customs similar to those associated with the Celts on the continent in what is now France and Holland and Germany and Spain, and areas associated with Celtic culture according to Roman writings, and even the namesakes and the names of peoples and the names of townships and rivers and so on are similar to those on the continent in regions associated with Celtic civilization. So they are assumed to have been Celtic, and these Celtic peoples who dwelt in what is now Britain and Ireland, they were attacked, and the region now known as England was conquered by a federation of peoples known as Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes, and they spoke a Germanic language similar to those spoken in Frisia, almost identical with that spoken in Frisia, which is now northern Holland, which is a Germanic type tongue. And they traditionally have been associated with the Germanic type civilization, and it is assumed that they were Germanic. If you have a similar language, it presupposes that at some stage or other there was a geographical proximity between the people speaking the same tongue, and that is what we find. And if you have a geographical proximity, people living beside each other, there are grounds to assume that perhaps they were related to each other. At least they must have intermixed to some degree. And this is logical. After they had conquered what is now England, they were attacked by the Vikings, who also conquered a portion of Northumbria, or northern England, and they also settled there to some degree, and these Vikings also settled in Ireland and in France, in the region known as Normandy. In Normandy they moved, they had a migration to Normandy, they settled there, they intermixed with the local peoples, and after one or two generations they forgot their own native language and they all spoke French. And following that, they invaded England and conquered it, and they interposed their version of French on the Germanic type tongue. And from that evolved the modern-day English language. And from the English language, we have that language that is spoken through a good portion of the globe, and that is needed for international commerce, for international scholarship, for international congress. The English language, the most famous language in the world, the most important language in the world, and a language, a living tongue, which gives an impress which reflects Anglo-Saxon civilization. We still use this term Anglo-Saxon civilization to reflect the whole of the English and American continuum of cultural heritage that they have bequeathed to the nations of the earth, for better or for worse. The modern world is an Anglo-Saxon world to a large degree, and they have set their mark on the last century or more of human progress. They have been responsible for much of the good that has transgressed in the world, that has come to pass in the world, and also some of the negative. But on the whole, they have been a positive influence. They have been a greater positive influence to the world than any other people. So it has been asked, well, these are people not Germanic, because we identify them as being of Israelite descent, of being ancient Hebrews, similar to the Celtic, so-called Celtic peoples whom they conquered, who were also, according to our studies, also of Israelite origin. And originally there had been 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 tribes of Israel divided into two different sections. The northern section was conquered by the Assyrians, taken away to different portions of the Assyrian Empire, where they lost awareness of their ancestry, and they became assimilated to the ways of the nations, and through a progression of events, they divided into different sections, split up, but in stages they all moved westward, and in the west they once again recoalesced, reconverged, and once more came together, different peoples of the same groups, original groups, came together, and we have proven this, we have traced them, and this is what we have been doing, and we identify the peoples of the British Isles with the tribes of Joseph, with in effect with all the 10 tribes, all of the tribes of Israel, even from the 12 tribes even, were to be found amongst the settlers of the British Isles, but the predominant tribe were those from Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. And we identify especially one of the groups who gave their name to England, the Angli, also known as the Angli on the continent. We identify them with Ephraim, because for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons being that Angel was a nickname, as we find in the Hebrew Bible. In chapter 31, verse 18, we find the expression Angel applied to Ephraim, also as noted by the commentator Rashi, and Angel was a nickname for Ephraim. Angel means a bull calf. A bull calf was a symbol of Ephraim, and even today a nickname for Britain is John Bull, reflecting this bull calf symbol of the tribe. And the name itself, Angel and Angli, Angle, could be interchanged on the continent and in Britain and in England and also in Hebrew. The word Angel can be pronounced something like angle. Angle, the iron becomes an an sound. So angle is the legitimate transcription of the word Angel in some dialects of Hebrew. We find this phenomenon applied to the Angles themselves in history. So we are justified in applying it to the historical Angles. And England is actually in effect named after the Angles, and this is Angle land, the land of the Angli, the people of the bull calf, the people of Ephraim. And now, the language they spoke was more similar to that of the Frisians. The Frisians are now on the coast of the Netherlands, north of the Netherlands coast, close to the border with Scandinavia. In ancient times they were there, but also further to the south, and also extending all the way down into France. And they were sometimes associated with the Angles and the Saxons. Sometimes the name Frisia or Frisia seems to have been applied to the Saxons. Procopius, for instance, he was alive when Angles and Saxons were occupying the area of England, and he says that in his time, Britia, that is Britain, was occupied by the Britons, the original Celtic peoples, and by the Angle and by the Frisia, and by Frisia he means the Frisians and he means the Saxons. And so to be the Venerable Bede, who lived around the same area a little bit later, in the same era, somewhat later, he too says that the Frisians were amongst the Angles and Saxons who invaded England, and the Angles too gave England its name. The Angles may be traced from they had an outpost in what is now Brunswick in eastern Germany, also according to Ptolemy, also in south of Denmark and Schleswig-Holstein, in that region, Angelen. They were there, and later on they too seem to have been possibly in Frisia alongside the Angles and Saxons, or they moved directly from this Jutland, this area of Denmark, across the seas into England. And we trace them, they were in the region of Germany, and they were exposed to the same influences that gave rise to the Germanic tongues. But there are indications that they did not allow intermarriage with the neighbouring peoples. This was a custom amongst the Germans. It was a known phenomenon, even until recently, recently within the last 150 years. It was not allowed for Germany, aristocrats were not allowed to intermarry with the common people. And if they did so, they would lose their status. And so this ruling had originally been applied to the whole of the Germanic tribes, or specific Germanic tribes, including the Angles and the Saxons, whilst they were on the continent. Once they conquered England, this ruling apparently did not apply anymore, which is interesting. In other words, they considered even though they looked down on the native Britons, they considered them, as far as intermarriage was concerned, as equal to themselves, or at least not significantly beneath them, whereas the native Germans they did so consider. Apparently, that is what we may infer from this ruling. We do not say that amongst the Germans there were not Israelites. We find a good number of Israelites having settled in Germany, and we have traced them in other works and other talks. We have explained how many Israelites remained in Germany, was now Germany, but they mostly moved out later over the course of time, especially in the 1700s, 1800s, and the large migrations to America. They were mainly Israelites who moved out. And but so too, this is a phenomenon. In other words, Angles and Saxons, even though they had been in the region, they had somehow absorbed the language and the customs, some of the customs, but they were not Germans, they were not related to the Germans to a great degree. We already seen with the Normans how the Normans had lost their own language, their own Scandinavian tongue, and picked up French within 2 generations, and then passed on this language that they'd picked up not that long ago themselves, and passed it on to the whole of the English people, creating the English language. So the languages may be lost, picked up, and passed on. So the Normans are a classical example of this. The Normans are a classical example of this. We also have Frisian legends, as we noted. The Frisians, to some degree, were interchangeable with the Saxons, were the same people that spoke the same language, and they apparently were part of the invaders of England. And the Frisian legends, they relate how their ancestors, were 3 brothers, Angli, Frisia, and Bruno apparently being the Angles, Saxo, Frisia, and Bruno, Saxo being the ancestor of the Saxons, Frisia of the Frisians, and Bruno of the Angles. The Angles having at one stage been in Brunswick in East Germany, that's where the name Bruno comes from, and moved. And these legends tell us, we found an example in the rare book section of the Hebrew Library, of the Hebrew University Library, when we were doing our research. And one of these versions was given by Le Petit in 1601, when he gives the histories and legends and traditions concerning the peoples who settled in the Netherlands in his time. Also, Fred Kozlak of the Netherlands sent us extracts from a work apparently in the Frisian tongue of Frisian legends, and from these sources we see the tradition that they say that these 3 brothers were originally in Jerusalem, meaning the land of Israel, before Nebuchadnezzar conquered it. In other words, they identified them with the 10 tribes of Israel. Before they were exiled, they were there, and then they went to what they call India, but India in their terminology was beside the Ammonian Mountains, as they say, and the Ammonian Mountains, according to Ptolemy, were in Central Asia. This ties up with other sources that we have that they were in Central Asia, and from Central Asia they moved to the west, and they eventually came to England, and they gave their name through the Angles to the English-speaking peoples. Therefore, they were not strictly speaking Germanic or of Germanic stock in the conventional meaning of the term. Thank you. May the Lord God of Israel bless you.